Good morning and happy Tuesday. So, we are continuing with our decimal practice this week, and today we are learning how to compare decimals. And you probably remember how to do this with numbers that do not have decimals, but today I'm going to teach you how to do it with decimals. So, of course, after you complete your review exercises and speed drills, then we will move on. And we should listen very carefully and pay attention to the directions because a lot of these comparisons are not what they seem. Let's read the directions first. It says zeros can be put to the right of a decimal without changing its value. This helps when comparing values of decimals. So what does that mean? Just like on the previous page, yesterday, Monday, I added a zero to do that $ amount. So when you add zeros to numbers after the decimal, it never changes the value. So for example, before we go on to their samples, if I have, like yesterday, 3.2, which is a problem we did yesterday, but I wanted to show you how this can be a dollar amount, so I added 0. Now it doesn't change it at all. It just helps you recognize it a little better. So what this is telling you is that if it's easier for you to understand a number by putting zeros behind it, you can put endless zeros and it will not change the value. And I'm going to show you why this matters and why it can help. So as we know, this sign means less than. I'm sure you remember in your earlier years that it would be the alligator mouth going to the right, and then the alligator mouth going to, or the alligator mouth biting to the left, means greater than. So here we have some examples, and they're really important that you pay attention because sometimes you may think a number is more or less and it's actually wrong because you're not paying close enough attention to the numbers after the decimals. But here we have an easier one. Here we have 2.3 and 2.7. Well, if we were to put a little zero here, and we don't even have to, we would know that 2.7 is bigger than 2.3, just like 2 and 30 would be less than 2 and 70. However, here is where it becomes a little bit tricky, and I want you to pay close attention. So here it says to compare 4.3 and 4.28. At first glance, it may seem that 28 is bigger because 28 as a whole is bigger than 3. However, when you're counting numbers after the decimal, it's more important to look at the numbers right after the decimal first. So, this has 4.3, as this has 4.2. And an easy way to determine that is to follow these directions here and put a 0. Since this has 2 digits, let's make it easier and put 2 digits on this one. Now we have 4.30 and 4.28. So that makes it easier to recognize that actually 4.3 is bigger than 4.28. Because as we go past the decimal, like I said, it's more important to watch for the number right after the decimal. If the number right after the decimal is the same, then you can go ahead and look at the number after. So we're going to do some samples and maybe one more just to practice. So here we have 7.6 and 7.3. So since we have just one number after the decimal for both, we can determine which one is bigger just by looking at it. So here we have 7.6. Even if we wanted to add a 0, we could. It would make it 7.60. If we wanted to add a 0 here, we could. 7.30. So it would make sense that 7.60 is bigger. Now here, we have one that may trick you at first. We have 0.2 and 0.17. And at first glance, 17 may look bigger. However, remember we're first looking at the numbers right after the decimal in the tenths place. And if we were to add a 0 to this 2 to make it 2 digits, we notice right away that 0.20 is bigger than 0.17. And therefore, 0.2 is bigger. And then here for number 1 is one that's quite easy. Why? Because if you look at your whole number, you can automatically know which one is bigger by determining which whole number is bigger. So it wouldn't matter how many numbers this one had behind it, even if it's a high number like 9, because the whole number is already bigger. So just by looking at the whole number, we know that 6 is bigger than 5, and therefore it's bigger. Just like I like to tell my students, if you had $6.70, it is bigger than $5.90. Even though those numbers after the decimal look bigger, think about it in dollar form and you'll easily recognize which is the larger amount. And that's how I like to do it. So go back, review them, rewatch the sample questions, take your time, read your reminders, and pay attention to your graphs on the bottom about the place values on your previous page, and then just complete 2 through 10. Here for page 79 for Tuesday, we are continuing with practicing with pronouns and agreement. Just remembering that your subject has to agree with your verb, your pronouns have to agree with your verbs. So for your first exercise, you're crossing out the incorrect form. So you will be crossing out the wrong verb. So you may use page 77 as a reference for some of these, but try to do them on your own and remember to say them out loud so you can better identify what makes sense. For number 1, we have I, and then in parentheses, do and does. So, should it be I do or I does? Well, do is singular, and so is I, so it cannot be does. And we learned that on page 77. Let's do just one more. Number 2, we have he. We've been using he a lot, so this should be easy. Would we say he were or he was? Well, it's only talking about one that is a singular pronoun, so you would say he was and cross out were. Down here for think be, you're going to identify the underlined pronouns in the following sentences. So you may have to go back to the previous unit to look at your reference papers, but all you're going to do is decide whether the underlined pronoun in the sentence is demonstrative or interrogative. If you don't quite remember how to decide or compare, remember that we did this last week. I'm going to find the exact page for you right here on page 76, which was Thursday's assignment from last week, comparing demonstrative and interrogative. And the good thing is it actually gives you lists. So we have a list here of interrogative pronouns, here of demonstrative pronouns, so you can actually identify them by using the list, but as usual, read them out loud. Over here we have pronouns do not modify nouns. So just remembering what we did on page 76, a quick review, just deciding. You would put DEM or INT here for numbers 1 through 10. So don't be afraid to go back to the previous unit, previous exercises to help you. Then for think C, for every verb below, you're going to write a subjective case personal pronoun that would serve as a correct subject. Also remember, we have an entire list of subjective and objective pronouns. So if you don't remember them from the top of from the top of your head, you can go back and use your reference. This is just for practice. We have our pronoun practice, and here we have all of our objective pronouns. Let's find that page over here on page 67. So you may use this page as a reference, as reminders, but my suggestion is that you try first to identify and then check your answer using page 67, just to see how well you are doing, quizzing yourself. And then just a reminder, a little look closely reminder, not to use the word ain't with any subject. So doesn't make sense. Here are our lists, and use these verbs agreeing with those subjects and pronouns. So here for Tuesday, you have your vocabulary exercise. Our words are getting just a tad bit more challenging. So of course, take a look at those definitions in the back of the book for your 4 vocabulary words. I would write them down because then you have them right next to you, available to help you complete your exercises. Now, if you use the clues up top, using the different parts of the words and their meanings, you may be able to just use this chart on the top to finish your vocabulary work, noticing which prefixes mean what, then the root words, and then the suffixes. So after you write your vocabulary words, as usual, you will complete these exercises, writing the meanings, and then filling in the sentences.